Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll have an additional panelist coming any minute. He's on his way. But we're going to go ahead and get started because I know some of you have classes and other obligations to run off to later this morning. I'm Ann Schmiesing. I am Interim Dean of the Graduate School. I'm really happy to welcome you to this workshop. And as the interim in my title will suggest, I'm very new to my role, and I've been looking forward to this workshop because I'm very interested in learning more about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program too. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowship is one of the most prestigious national fellowships available to graduate students. The fellowship provides 3 years of financial support with an annual stipend of $34,000 and a $12,000 cost of education allowance. The fellowship also provides opportunities to participate in international research collaborations, and it gives access to NSF-supported research infrastructure. The fellowship is awarded directly to the individual, so it's a portable fellowship, and that means that you may use it at whatever graduate institution you choose to attend. Each spring, the NSF awards approximately 2,000 new fellowships, and in 2016, 28 CU Boulder students received awards. Our total cohort of graduate research fellows is now over 140 students, and that means that we are among the top 20 institutions for the number of NSF graduate research fellows. It's really quite incredible. The graduate school hosts this workshop every fall to help seniors and first and second year graduate students gain valuable insights into what makes a successful proposal. And before I introduce the panelists who have so graciously given up their time this morning to be on this panel, before I introduce them, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to the graduate school staff members who have made this workshop possible, Executive Assistant Stephanie Pomponio, and also Senior Assistant Dean Gretchen O'Connell. So big thank you to them for organizing this event. Today we're pleased to have among our panelists 2 faculty presenters who have served as NSF reviewers. We have a number of current fellows, and we also have a proposal analyst from the Office of Contracts and Grants to provide advice on working with the NSF online system, FastLane. And today's presenters are Joanne Silverstein, Professor of Environmental Engineering, Stephen Moisish, Professor of Geological Sciences, Michael Spires, Principal Proposal Analyst, Office of Contracts and Grants, Matt Hartsock, a GRFP Fellow in Psychology, Jordan Terrio, GRFP Fellow in Chemistry, Victoria Hartwig, a Fellow in ATOC, Jake Patine, a Fellow in Physics, William McNeary, Fellow in Chemical Engineering, and Simone Hyater-Adams, a Fellow in Atlas. Thank you so much. We're going to begin with Michael Spires talking a bit about the application process in FastLane.
Okay. So before I get started, can you all hear me?
You just have to push the button that says select,
Ah, there we go.
and if it turns off, then push it again till it turns green.
It's flashing orange at me.
Okay.
I'll try the other one.
Push it again till it turns off. They're all the same.
They're all the same?
Try that one with cord.
How about now? That's
Yes.
better. Okay. So just to get a sense of who I'm talking to here, how many of you are seniors or undergrads? A handful. How many of you applied last year as a graduate student and are reapplying? And the rest of you are, I'm assuming, are all applying or thinking about applying for the first time, correct? Okay. So There have been some changes from last year's solicitation. The biggest one being that if you now apply as a graduate student, you only get to apply once. So this is something to take into consideration if you're thinking that you might just try it out and see. You used to be able to do that and you would get feedback and you could submit a revised application the following year. That is still possible if you applied as a grad student last year and were not selected, but this is the last year when that's gonna be possible. So from here on out, it's a one bite at the apple. So you really do wanna make sure before you decide to apply that you're in a good position, that you've got a well thought out program, and that you're going to be competitive, because this is a highly competitive program. They award 2,000 of these each year. Last year they had more than 16,000 applications. So, but actually a 1 in 8 chance of success is not all that bad when you look at what most success rates are like for proposals at all levels from any of the funding agencies. So you have a reasonable chance. You just want to make sure that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's. You should all have received a handout that looks somewhat like this, and we're going to post that, or it has been
It's
posted?
on our site, and we also have printouts right
Okay.
here.
So if you didn't get a copy when you came in, you can grab when you leave, and they will be posted on the grad school's website for future reference. The first couple of pages in this handout talk about getting yourself registered in Fastlane, which you need to do if you don't already have one. If you registered when you applied for the GRFP last year, you can still use the one you used last year. You don't need to create a new one. But if you have a regular Fastlane ID, which looks sort of like a social security number, 3 numbers, 2 numbers, 4 numbers, that won't work for this competition. You need to actually create one specifically for the GRFP. And then it will ask you for a bunch of security questions so that if you forget what that is, and if you applied last year, you probably haven't logged back into Fastlane, because why would you? You may need to review those answers and you'll be able to recover your password. As you complete the materials, you will upload them into the Fastlane system. That is the official record that your information has been uploaded and complete, and NSF has received it. You must do get all of your pieces of required information. That's your 2 personal statements, your transcripts, must be received by the application deadline, which, by the way, is an hour earlier this year than it was last year. It used to be you had until 6 p.m. local. It's now 5 p.m. local. So make sure that you get it in by 5 p.m. And then your letters of reference, which you do not enter the letters, you just enter the emails for the individuals, not your relatives, that you are asking to write letters on your behalf. And they must have those letters in 3 hours earlier than last year. It used to be 6 p.m. It's now 3 p.m. on November the 3rd. So you want to make sure you ask people to write letters well in advance of that deadline. And there is actually a little feature in the GRFP module that allows you to nag them if you see that they have not submitted the letters. So you can actually send them reminders that they need to get those in. It's really a good idea when you ask someone to write a letter on your behalf, send them a copy of your application materials as well so they can tailor the letter specifically to what you're talking about. So that's kind of the basic information. I don't want to actually sit here and read this handout to you, but I'm happy to take questions at the end if you have them.
Can you hear me? I have kind of a loud voice, so maybe I'll avoid the microphone. So I'm Joanne Silverstein. What? Oh, okay. Well, it looks like this one may not be loud.
So let's try that.
Okay. Now you can, everybody can hear me. So I just want to remind you, those of you who don't know, this is a large fellowship. It's $138,000 that you can spend over 3 to 5 years. How many of you are thinking of a research master's degree? You're also welcome to apply for this. Again, of course, you can only spend it over the time during which you're enrolled in graduate school and doing your work. So you may not wind up spending the whole $138,000 over that time. $34,000 a year is the stipend. $12,000 is the educational allowance, which the university accepts as full tuition here. So that's a nice deal. Michael mentioned the deadlines for application. I was going to suggest get on the NSF website, read the solicitation for the award. Read it twice. The most important thing you can do, in addition to submitting a wonderful proposal in terms of content, is to make sure it addresses all of the points that are mentioned in the solicitation. Panelists, I'm trying to talk about this from the perspective of a reviewer. I've been on 2 review panels. I've had 4 students that I've advised who've gotten the fellowship. And it turns out you do best if you follow the solicitation guidelines as closely as you can. Okay, so you can look up the deadlines. The notes, by the way, that I'm talking from are posted on the graduate school webpage. So be sure and check your eligibility. Michael mentioned the big change, which is going to be, as a graduate student, you only have one opportunity to apply. You may apply as a college senior and then reapply as a graduate student. Okay, that will always be allowed. NSF's rationale for that is they're trying to encourage people early to think about research. That's their spoken rationale. I think they're also trying to streamline their application process. That 16,000 applications a year is probably getting unwieldy. Yeah, and I think they're really trying to encourage people actually to shift down a year, start thinking about applying as a college senior, and then reapply as a graduate student. So this year, it's not an issue for people reapplying, but after that, you're only going to be allowed to apply once. So it is important to think carefully about, are your ideas coherent enough in your first year of graduate school, or do you want to postpone it till your second year to possibly improve your chances of acceptance? There are a lot of interesting eligibility requirements besides the number of years you've spent in school. Part of that NSF GRF website has allowable fields of study. Look and make sure you're in an allowable field of study. There are certain fields, mostly the health sciences and professional fields, which are not allowed to apply for the GRF. You must be a U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident to be eligible for the fellowship. And then I want to cut right to how is the application evaluated. Your application has 3 components. Personal information, which includes transcripts and basically what we would call a curriculum vitae or biographical information. And that you upload separately according to the format that NSF wants. And then there's a personal statement that's now 3 pages. It combines what was formerly 2 statements, which was personal information plus a narrative of your research experience, now is a single statement of 3 pages, and then a research proposal, which is a 2-page limit. They're very strict about format, 8.5 by 11, 1-inch margins, 12-point Times New Roman font, no messing around with trying to squeeze too much information in. So you have to stick to that format or the proposal will be declined without review. So let me talk a little bit about the 2 criteria that are used for evaluating these proposals and what they mean. All NSF proposals are reviewed according to 2 major criteria: intellectual merit and broader impacts. Both of those have to be addressed, and they should be addressed explicitly in your proposal. Okay, that means you need to identify how you're addressing the intellectual merit and how you're addressing the broader impacts. Intellectual merit is probably the hardest to define clearly, and obviously how those criteria are applied are going to be in the minds of the reviewers. But intellectual merit basically says, is your research going to make a contribution, a substantial contribution to the body of knowledge and society? Okay, so you need to identify what elements of the research that you're proposing are going to make a contribution to your field. Okay, so that's a point where most of you all have not been involved in significant research projects. You're young, and so at that point, I strongly encourage you to consult with your advisor or faculty that you know, or people who know something about the field, and discuss your ideas. Okay, it's not disallowed to seek advice from faculty or graduate advisors about how your ideas are focused and where they sit in terms of the body of knowledge in your area. There are three elements that I think most reviewers look at when they look at intellectual merit. And remember, this is a fellowship that goes to you. Okay, the NSF is betting on your potential as a researcher. So your job as a proposer is to give them all of the information they would need to say this person is likely to succeed. And your personal information in your CV, that would include what you've done in the past. That may include your grades. The NSF reviewers do not look at GRE scores. It's been a while since I've been on a panel.
This is true.
That's still
They do
true.
not. But
Okay.
They do look at
They certainly look at your undergraduate grades. What are the transformational aspects of your research? And then the third component is, are there institutional resources available to support what you're doing? And there's a couple of ways to do that. You can mention some of the resources that you're going to be using, both in your intellectual merit component and in your broader impacts. And then the other major kind of piece, I think, that folds into intellectual merit are going to be your reference letters. And Steve is going to talk more explicitly about the importance of reference letters. But that's also a component that reviewers use to look at intellectual merit. The next category is broader impacts, and that is a category that often gets ignored, and it should not be ignored. Very important component. Broader impacts can be accomplished through the research itself. In other words, can you state the benefit of your research to society as a whole or to certain segments of society, but also activities that combine research into education, research into outreach that, again, has social benefits and academic benefits. So what does that mean? Efforts that you make as a graduate student to encourage the full participation of all sectors of society in STEM fields and research. Improvements to STEM education. Does that mean you're involved in a class or mentoring undergraduate students or high school students? Increased public literacy in STEM fields. Do you give talks or participate in workshops which are given with the public participation? Development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce. That's a little vague, but again, you get the idea that NSF is looking at people who have an awareness of international issues or international applications of your research. Economic competitiveness, if you're involved in a project that has industrial components or collaboration, that can be a broader impact. And then anything that generally improves the infrastructure, I don't mean physical infrastructure, I mean institutional infrastructure for research and education. Those are very broad statements. Your job as a proposer is to narrow them down into specific activities. So reviewers will be looking not just for parroting these very broad statements, but for showing or demonstrating how you're going to address any one or more of these. Again, you don't need to address them all, obviously. That's an institutional strength at the University of Colorado. We have many, many organizations, programs, and activities that are involved in some form of outreach. It can be educational outreach, it can be social outreach, and to get engaged in one of those activities specifically is a very good idea if you're going to mention that in your proposal. So address any of these components of broader impacts, but make sure you address them by putting in some detail about how, what you're going to do, what your proposed activities are going to do. And if you link that to your proposed research, that makes it even stronger, of course. NSF loves to see that overlap of research and education. When you're doing, and you can carry those themes, by the way, through both statements. I think that's the other thing. The strong proposals that I have seen are kind of seamless and may follow a kind of narrative flavor. So you can, in your personal statement, describe how your own experience has led you to focus on a particular topic of research. And then in your research proposal, you can elaborate on the scientific and technical aspects of that. In both of those statements, you should identify again clearly with subheadings or boldface what part addresses intellectual merit, what part addresses broader impacts. In other words, what of your intellectual development in the personal statement ties to a general awareness of intellectual merit issues, what part of your history has put you in a position to pick up these elements of broader impacts. So that's all I'm going to say, and then I'll let Steve talk about reference letters.
Thank you, Joanne. Well, the two opening speakers certainly gave you a lot of details, and you may have noticed me nodding my head and doing thumbs up on several of these. But since so much was covered already, I'm going to get down to some specifics. First of all, I'm delighted to hear that we're in the top 20. But I think we should be in the top 10 or even in the top 5. Well, okay, top 5 then, because for all of the reasons and more that Joanne enumerated. So down to specifics, I'm going to talk about letters, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about broader impacts, because I have some opinions on that, and about the review process. I've been on one in-person review and 2 remote panels, and I've had the honor of writing many letters and reviewing many letters and talking to program managers at NSF about this. I've also been involved with the NASA equivalent, which is called NESSF, the NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship, which I've had many students, more than 6, I think, who've gotten NESSF fellowships. It's not quite as generous as NSF's. It was also pointed out, thank you, that you have a 1 in 8 chance, 12.5% or something. That's actually pretty good. There are a number of NSF programs where the success rate is 3 or 4%, which statistically speaking is more or less a random selection. So we have of course, a shot at it, we collectively, but there are some things that we can do to improve that shot. And so let's talk about letters. When you ask someone for a letter, make sure, as you pointed out, that they have a copy of, or at least a draft of your statements. I really loved how you said that we should weave in broader impacts in both the research discussion as well as the personal statement and statement of research background. I cannot emphasize that for you more, that your letter writer needs to be aware of that. This is in your hands. When you choose a letter writer, it ought not to just be anybody. It should be somebody who you have confidence in, their ability to write a letter instead of like the last 5 minutes before it's due, to really get into details. Because I assure you that sitting in panel, when you have 300 proposals in a particular panel subject area, which is divided amongst, say, 15 or 20 panelists, they're going to look at the letters. And if it's 2 sentences, I'm sorry, that puts it in a pile that otherwise wouldn't be the discard pile, because you have so many proposals. And I hate to say this, but this is tough love, people. They're looking for ways to deny it. And so don't give them any gotchas, all right? Get good proposal letter writers. And that means somebody who can embrace your narrative, say that how long that they've known you and in what capacity, and you're not someone you've known for only 2 weeks, or you took one class with them one semester and they barely remember you, but someone who can give some feedback. Not all letters should be that this person walks on water and heals the sick and so on. That's great, but a real letter is one that has some balance. Like, I see a lot of potential in this person. There is room for them to grow in a particular area, but an investment in this person is sure to pay dividends. Something like that is going to raise you up in terms of the letter writers. If you haven't started, start right after this meeting in getting your ducks in a row, because panic can motivate us to do a lot of great things, right? But usually not elegantly or in a sophisticated way. About broader impacts. One thing that I consistently see as a reviewer for these NSF proposals, both in the fellowship program and actually in NSF as a whole, I review lots of proposals from different programs, is that the broader impacts aren't formulaic. It isn't like, I just did this. Is that you weave it into a story, and one thing that comes to mind is that you begin your narrative with an example of a broader impact that you're actively involved in. I'll give you an example. You start off with saying something along the lines of, as I completed my discussion of why trilobite eyes are so amazing and they never evolved again, I got a number of blank stares from the audience and like, who should care about this? And it's as you're reading so many of these proposals, you come across something like that, and you're like, wow, this is interesting. Avoid gimmicking, all right? But have fun with it. Show that you sort of enjoy crawling into that reviewer's mind and showing them something about yourself. That's where I think we can be, instead of in the top 8, the top 3, okay? Because they're telling this to people at Caltech and Princeton and so on. You have to do it within strict guidelines. You have margins to think about. And if you think you can mess around with the kerning, forget about it. Don't go there, because they'll bring out the rulers and you're done, okay? All right, stick a fork in that proposal. It's done. I hate to say it, but that's the way it is. So now, broader impacts, letters of reference, the panel review process. So if they have an in-person panel, which they're doing less and less of, okay, but if they have an in-person panel, you're in a hotel somewhere in DC with a bunch of other people, some old colleagues. Hey, how's it going? Isn't the food here terrible? And so on. But then you're sitting in a room, and there's always like a panel leader and a co-leader, people who have done this several times, and they coach you in the reviewer process. So they say, this is what we're looking for. We have different pots of money, but they keep repeating broader impacts, because there are a lot of clever ideas out there for research and how to take this to the next level. But they want to know, are you going to share this with kids in elementary schools? Are you going to bring this to, say, retirees who are interested in knowing what's going on in science and research and like to have something like that. I've seen proposals where, I'm interested in water resources, so I spent 6 months in Uruguay putting together water purification things for villages, and that's way over the top, okay? That's like, exactly. That's like New Testament stuff, right? You don't have to do that, but share what you have done and make it natural when you write, and this was also pointed out, that when you write something, and not everyone is like this, but I'm going to encourage you to do this. Share your writing, have other people read it. It ought to make sense to an educated person. It doesn't have to be a specialist in your particular field. Go through 3, 4, 5, 6 iterations. Call upon people. I think we have a database here of reviewers and people who've gotten the fellowships and so on that you can ask. And I've had people email me and say, Professor, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Can you, give me some pointers on this? And we're certainly happy to do that. What's going to sink a proposal? I told you that if it's a bad letter, bad meaning, oh, this person's terrible, don't give this person the fellowship. You won't get one of those. But it's just they couldn't be bothered to write you a letter. And that's actually, sad but true. Another thing is the format. But it may also be that it didn't follow the call for proposal, or that it somehow didn't meet the criteria for broader impacts and research possibilities that are in there. So start now, find good letter writers, think about the hooks that you can put in to attract attention to your project, and share the excitement that you have in putting this proposal together, and crawl into that person's mind, because the pen is mightier than anything else in order to do that.
I just want to make a quick announcement that I should have made earlier. But Steve brought up the issue of writing, which is terribly important. This proposal must be written perfectly. No typos, no grammatical errors. And then you can add to the interesting components, again, that will get reviewers hooked in to what you're doing. And to that end, Keith Molinar, who's the Assistant Dean in Engineering for Graduate Education, has organized a writing workshop for next week, September 16th, from 12 to 1. Has someone from, I believe, the program in Writing and Rhetoric to give you tips, particularly slanted towards proposal writing. So that's in the Discovery Learning Center, is the big building on the east side of the Engineering Center. It's in the so-called collaboratory. It's a big auditorium room on the ground floor. So you can find it if you get to the Engineering Center on the east side of campus. Someone will direct you to the so-called DLC, or Discovery Learning Center Collaboratory. That's noon to 1 o'clock on September 16th.
Very good.
Now that we've turned it over to our current fellows, just to spend a couple of minutes, some of you might have been to these workshops in the past. Just talk a little bit about your proposal process and any feedback you got, or what you thought made your proposal successful. So why don't we start with Simone, and then
Yeah, I think it's good. Well, okay. Like they said before, my name's Simone Hyder-Adams. I am in the Atlas Institute. They have an interdisciplinary PhD under the School of Engineering, if you know the Atlas building, PICO. So my process, I applied my first year and didn't get it, and so I got it on my second try this past year. They have different kind of categories you apply under. And so mine was science education. I do physics education research. And I'd say, yeah, the first time it was just not as defined as a project, I would say. And I think the big things I want to note are like the last thing that was said about having someone else read yours. I'm like almost 100% sure the only reason why I got this is because last minute I had someone read my personal statement, and they totally made me realize that I did not like add anything from my first year of grad school in there. It was still like talking about past experiences. And so like I rewrote like a whole page of it to like talk about all the stuff that I went through. And it was like, they were like, wow, it's like 100 times better. Like it was way better. So yeah, that saved me for sure when it came to applying for this. Yeah, I think my letters also changed as well because I had my advisor, we'd known each other for a year, and then I had another person who was an advisor who wrote me a letter, so there were two people other than like my old professors from undergrad or something. So those two upgrades I think are what really got me my proposal through this year, or last year, whatever it was. But yeah, I don't know, I'm sorry, I kind of don't remember already what you asked us to say, but.
Okay, my name's William McNeary. I'm a third-year student in the chemical engineering department. I applied for the NSF when I was a senior in undergrad and received it. And so that was a little odd for me because at the time you apply, like you haven't even submitted all your applications to schools yet, and it's like they want you to write this proposal, like you know what you're going to do and you know where you're going, and you need to be confident in that. And personally, I wasn't. I had no idea what I was going to do, but you have to write the essays in a way that give the image that you do know what you're going to do. So that was weird for me, and I'm not very good at talking about myself. So I had written the essays, like the first draft was the language was very reserved, and I was like, well, I might try this thing, but if it doesn't work, don't be too disappointed. You know, that was the whole approach to my essays, was like, don't get your hopes up, and you can't write like that. You have to project an image of confidence, and so that was probably the thing I had to work the hardest on, and that was all the feedback I got at first, was like, I was writing everything in a really passive way, and you have to, rather than saying like, I would like to do this experiment, you say, I will do this experiment, and I will collect this data, and it will tell me these things. So you have to be pretty deliberate about what you want to accomplish, and it doesn't matter if you, like I said, I'm going to this school and I'm going to work with this professor and I'm going to do this project, and I didn't do any of those things. I went to a completely different school, worked with a completely different professor, and working on a completely different project. So no one's going to be following you to make sure you do what you only in the sense that you need to be somewhere and be productive and be making progress. It's not the topic that matters so much, and they know that. You just have to, what they're really testing is, can you write a coherent and well thought out proposal that passes the review of these people who are used to writing these kind of things. All the things everybody says about letting other people read it, like, absolutely do that. Like, I had professors, some of which weren't even my letter writers. Anybody that would take the time, I asked them to read it, and it helped a lot. Do you have a question? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a hard thing to do, and it took me a couple iterations to really start to pull that in, because at first I just tried to skirt around that, because it's hard to write about that, and especially when you don't know what your project is going to be. But I sort of proposed that I think my proposal I was writing about algae biofuels, something along those lines, and I had proposed as part of my research, like talking to local farmers in the community that I claimed I was going to go to school in about algae farming and like how they could do it in their farm ponds and harvest the algae for biofuel. And it was like just trying to make the effort to do outreach with your research and not just publish in journals, but actually talk to the public about it. That's the kind of thing that they're wanting to hear about. They don't want you to just be this kind of walled-in graduate student that's just going to do your research and not show it to anybody outside of your field. And as an engineer too, NSF, it's kind of a balancing act because NSF also cares about your contributions to the fundamental field, like your contributions to fundamental science. And that's also a little bit more difficult as an engineer because I was like, I want to do this very applied project, and it's easy to write about like the broader impacts in the sense that like this will contribute to society in this way, but it was harder to search around for the sort of fundamental scientific contributions that NSF has in mind. And even the feedback on my essays, they said, well, this project seems very applied. And I was like, well, yeah, because I'm an engineer. So that's the struggle too, is how to write it about in a way that sounds like not that you're just going to invent something or make something, but that you're also going to contribute to science in general.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm in the physics department. So that last point was a really great one. And in particular, you're going to want to keep in mind that you're writing to very intelligent people, but they're not experts in your particular subfield, probably. And on that note, I also wanted to add that I don't think it hasn't been touched on that you get to select your fields that you're applying to in the application. And so, for example, in physics, you can select AMO, condensed matter, et cetera. And so that will also dictate who's reading your essay. So that's something to consider. On the last point, though, just to stick to kind of buzzwords, certainly sprinkle in some general science words that everyone can relate to, and then get into some depth as you go on, but don't get into the nitty-gritty details because they likely won't understand exactly what you're doing, and it will just seem boring and like you don't have a good overall picture of things. Two things that also weren't mentioned, images in your essays. I think I didn't use any in mine. I think the best place if you're going to have a figure is in your research proposal, and in that case only if you have a really great figure, I would say, is from talking to other people. And then, the other thing was applying to specific subfields. But this panel has been amazing. All the advice has been just incredible. And the one thing that I wanted to highlight more was the making the two essays kind of into one cohesive narrative, which, you can't do that necessarily chronologically as they read the two essays separately, but just tying back and forth your previous experience, how it's motivated you and what you're doing now and where you're going to go. And then the last thing is when you are requesting letters, probably from professors or whoever, what I did was I really helped them along. I didn't just kind of give them I didn't just send them an email saying, will you write this letter for me, and then send them a link to the NSF. I gave them comprehensive sheets of, first of all, who I was, because they're busy people and they might not remember, what I had done with them, and some topics that I wanted them to address that helped make my essays, that helped make their letters cohesive with my essays and my whole narrative. So really kind of just giving them as much information as possible, and even saying exactly, you can, an extreme example would be to write the letter for them and then say, for example. But just really helping along, and I think that'd be much appreciated, and also help with the cohesion of your entire application.
So, hi everyone, I'm Victoria Hartwick. I'm a 5th-year graduate student at ATOC, which is the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences Department, but I'm actually a planetary scientist. So, with respect to that, sometimes there might not be a subheading or a particular place where you can submit your application that fits exactly what you're doing. So it might not say planetary science. So if that's your case, you have to think really carefully about where you submit it, both in how you write your proposal, because that might be different depending on who you assume is reading it. But they will move it, I think, if they think it would fit better somewhere else. So don't paralyze yourself in panic that you're going to submit it to the wrong subsection. My biggest piece of advice, I guess I'd say, is to be really think about what you want the reviewer to get out of your proposal and make that explicit. Like, you don't have to sneak in the background research or what the background or broader impacts is. Be really explicit. Don't make it hard for your reviewer to know what you're proposing and what the impact of that proposal is. And that, again, falls into, you may think you're doing that, but if you have somebody else read it, sometimes we get so sucked into this particular, we've looked at the same document over and over again, you lose the ability to look at it. So again, handing it to somebody else is really, really valuable. And as grad students, a lot of us are perfectionists, so that can be difficult to get that critique, but don't let the first person who reads this paper be the reviewer. And I guess I'll just stop there and pass it on and answer any other questions later.
Hi, my name is Jordan Terrio. I just started my 3rd year in the chemistry department. So I applied to the GRFP as a senior and did not receive it. I applied as a first-year grad student and did receive it. So looking at the differences between my 2 applications, I think gave me a lot of highlights for what was better about my application. And there are 3 things that were very different and that were all mentioned in my positive reviews the second time around that I want to share with you. The first thing, you've probably figured this out already, is broader impacts. And I know that I sat in one of these panels back at my undergraduate institution and couldn't figure out why, for a research proposal, everyone on the panel spent like 80% of their time talking about broader impacts. It's because that's where you're going to mess up. Because we're really, really good at talking about science, but we're not always so great about broader impacts. And as you were saying, it can feel really cheesy, and it can feel really gimmicky. Like, what, do I have to tell these people that I'm gonna, cure cancer and, have, like, underprivileged children help me do that? Yeah, you kind of do. It's gonna feel a little cheesy, it's gonna feel a little gimmicky, but instead, just tell yourself that you're giving them what they want and what is on their checklist and what they're here to find out. So it's okay if you feel a little bit cheesy going a little heavy-handed with the broader impacts. It's half the merit criteria. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the way that you discuss your science. So we have this tendency to say what we will do or what the final product is going to be. Your reviewer will probably find it very refreshing if you frame your science in good old hypothesis-driven science. I actually had 2 reviewers say how pleased they were to see, and this was not me, this was my professor who told me to do this, I didn't come up with this, that I stated a central hypothesis and a testable hypothesis. We've kind of lost that along the way sometimes thinking about our research proposals. Give a testable hypothesis to your research even if you have a broad goal. And then the third thing is the visual appeal and organization of your application. So if you appear organized visually, people will think that you are mentally organized. So yeah, it's psychology, right? So in those 2 pages, make sure that you have subheadings. Explicitly have an intellectual merit and broader impact subheading. You are not being too heavy-handed. Do it. So yes, have subheadings. My professor loves figures, so he has a 1 figure per page requirement. I think figures are very nice. If you don't have space for subheadings and figures, then your writing needs to be leaned out. If you're worried about kerning, you have a bigger problem than kerning. So lean it out. Someone else mentioned being a little more broad. You don't have to be very heavy in the details. You should be technical, you should be competent, but you can absolutely lean it out. So those are the 3 things that I changed and that I believed helped me be successful the second time around. Thanks.
Hey guys, my name's Matt Hartsock. I was lucky to apply for the GRFP last year for the first time and receive it. I think the main reason that I got it was because I got a lot of good advice along the way, and I think that everything that's been set up here is really helpful, and there are things that I heard last year that helped me too. 3 other things I'd like to add. So I'm in the neuroscience department, and so I was submitting a very, the project that I'm working on is very medically relevant. That being said, for people who are in medical sciences, the NSF is not the main funding source for medical research. NIH is. And so I would say, someone told me last year, don't let this essay smell like health research. It's supposed to be more about, how can we use this to, fix our spacecrafts and submarines, like more broad societal stuff. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, and that's already been said by a few people, is organization. So I thought of these essays a lot of the same way that I thought about the essays for like the GRE English section. It doesn't really matter what you say quite as much as it matters that it's presented really, really clearly. And so, like's already been said, break each essay into, intellectual merit and broader impact sections. Within those sections, it's okay to have, like highlighted or bolded or italicized words or sentences. Like if you're submitting a science application with, research hypothesis, you want that to be the thing that people see almost first when they look at your essay, just so everything stands out really clearly. You should, someone who doesn't know anything about your field should be able to look at your essay and within like a minute sort of basically know what you're doing, even if they don't understand everything that's written out and spelled out with all the details in the paragraphs that are beneath the subheadings. And the third thing I'd like to say is the broader impact stuff, when I was writing, it was really hard for me to figure out how broader impacts and intellectual merit were different, because, a lot of the things that we find in research both, advance knowledge and also help society. So like, where's the line between those two things? It's very gray. I would say if you're wondering about that, the best thing to do is look up either a GRFP or another NSF-supported grant and just read what people wrote. I was lucky because my advisor in neuroscience is actually supported by an NSF grant, so I looked at his broader impact sections and got a whole lot of ideas and basically just regurgitated them in my essay. So I strongly recommend doing that if you have that opportunity. Also, you'll find as you're doing background research for this GRFP, that there are troves of GRFP essays on the internet. There's one specific thing with this like Excel document. Have you guys found this? There's like an Excel document somewhere online. I forget how I found it, but it's got like 20 or 30 like example essays in it. So look around, those things are out there. Thanks.
Does anyone want to?
I think it probably has to do with your own sense of your readiness. And so one thing to do is to sit down, and this won't hurt you in any case, and to draft up a proposal and have people read it. And if it is coherent, especially if you have like your advisor read it, but other people, more senior graduate students read it. And if it seems like it's ready to go, then go ahead. I don't think, I'm trying to think as a panelist, we would look at things like publications, okay? If you've had conference proceedings or publications, that certainly counts in your kind of professional background. That said, of the 4 students I've had, 2 of them had never published, they'd never done undergraduate research. I think one of the things that's important is obviously the strength of your proposal, but then I think what they accomplished in their narrative is what led them to want to do research at a more advanced level. In other words, what were the problems or things that they became aware of in school that they thought were not resolved and needed to be resolved? And I think the other component that was really important in their research proposal And I think the comment about hypothesis-driven is also important. That's a guideline for reviewers. It's just something that we're all familiar with. But one of the things that she did that I thought was really terrific is she pointed out the risks and challenges of doing what she proposed to do. So more than just a hypothesis, which is kind of a forward-looking thing, is to go back and look and say, what are the challenges I'm going to have to overcome? And in her case, it was data acquisition, and she had a few suggestions about how she was going to overcome them, but she left it open, that this was a risk in the research. And all of us who do research know about those kinds of risks, know about the difficulty of data acquisition or experiments failing. So I think those are the things you can say as someone who may not have a huge track record in research that you can use to point out that you understand what the research process is. And so, again, I would rely on, can you put together a good essay in the next month or a good application in the next month? Have people read it and review it. And by the way, you're allowed to even submit and then withdraw your application, and you will not be penalized as having that count for one of your 1 year, right? As long as you do it before November 15th. So you can go fairly far along the way in that process. And as I said, I think it's worth the investment, even if you decide not to submit and then hold it till the next year. That can become something of a guideline. I always encourage my graduate students to write proposals just so they get a better understanding of the research process. They kind of get themselves organized. So, that may not be the most decisive answer, but I think you should give yourself a test for the next month or so and see how it works, and then make the decision.
May I pipe in a little bit? I know there are a lot of questions, but hopefully this will cover a few of the questions maybe. So there's this idea of hypothesis-driven science. Well, it doesn't matter what field you're in. You present an idea. If it's a good idea, it's a testable idea. Explain where the idea came from, why the idea is a good idea, and how you intend to test it. Maybe you've done some preliminary tests. Really, that applies to absolutely every field. And I also wanted to say how, I mean, it's pretty clear to me why all of you got the Graduate Research Fellowship. I mean, this is an amazing panel over here. I just kept like nodding my head and going, yeah, this is exactly right. How do you explain highly technical details? Well, historically, there are several ways to do that. You could do it by metaphor, analogy, or parable, or something. But you should be able to explain it, but keeping in mind that they will find the expertise. That in a panel, they'll say, is there anybody here who knows something about the atmospheric dynamics of outer solar system moons like Titan or something? They're going to find somebody, or they'll find someone who has a qualification to review that. But I felt that was another thing I'd like to pipe in about. So that's a broader impacts category.
That really is kind of a way of suggesting that maybe your broader impacts weren't as strong. And I do want to come back to that theme because it's come up in a number of comments. You do not have to have every type of broader impact in your proposal. Do not look at that as a laundry list of things that you must include. You wouldn't throw a bathtub in if you were trying to design a mass spectrometer, right? Unless you needed one. So concentrate on broader impacts that are actually relevant to what you want to do. If you are, for example, a science education person, then yeah, maybe mentoring students is a good example to talk about. As an engineer, maybe not so much. But if that is something that you actually like to do anyway and you're doing in your free time, absolutely put that down. Be specific. I went to this school. I went for so many hours each week. I mentored so many students. You want to give them a sense that you're not just throwing it in there because you have to have something that you're talking about, that you can provide detail that shows the level of commitment. Because what they're really looking for, and I'm going to quote here from the solicitation, they're trying to support individuals with the demonstrated potential to be high-achieving scientists and engineers. So you're trying to make the case, I am such a person. This is why I am such a person. So give them that level of detail.
I have just a comment on that. In line with, if you haven't maybe done something that you feel fits with broader impacts, don't feel like you have to go out this month and like spend all of your time coming up with some great outreach program. The biggest thing is that I think that you thought about the broader impacts on a specific level and have some sort of plan that they can actually see. So even if you haven't mentored underprivileged children for the past 8 years, if you have a specific plan of this is how I want to introduce this topic, this is where I want to do it, I think that works as well.
I'd like to throw something in there too. Most of us are TAs. That's a good broader impacts thing because it's talking about science education. If you've TA'd, if you've tutored, if you've taught review sessions, if you've done anything like that, that stuff works really well. Also, and I wouldn't say to go heavy-handed with this approach, but something I did just to make it look a little more beefy when I was writing about my outreach, I said some things that I was going to do in the future that year. And I think if you're there are a bunch of outreach mentoring programs here, especially with high school students. And I think if you can say that you're going to be involved in that program, name the program specifically, and give as much detail about it as possible, then people see that you're on a trajectory to keep doing these things. And I got really good feedback about that in my application reviews.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that, which is just, there's a lot of programs that are here and you can talk about them even if you haven't done them already. But I also wanted to stress that there's different, I don't know if there's other kind of, because I feel like most of the disciplines are specifically technical science, but because I applied for science education, a lot of the things for my application and concerns for my application were different. So you want to make sure you look at or try and talk to people who are going to submit to the same subdiscipline that you are and maybe read those specific applications, because concerns about broader impacts, none for me, because I am doing a project that's all broader impacts. So it is what I was really trying to focus on was making my project more science-y, right? I looked at all of the applications that I have in my kind of folder of references and resources were all people who submitted to science education, because they're also going to be, people are going to want to know, okay, so what is this hypothesis? What are you testing? What does that even look like when it's not technical science? So it's kind of, there are different concerns depending on where you're submitting. So for my broader impacts, a lot of the things that I did, and once again, it's kind of hard because this balance between having a narrative, right, but also being very clear. And there was a lot of talk about, make sure you're separating out these sections with broader impacts and intellectual merit. And I can't remember exactly, I think my two proposals are blended in my mind, so I apologize. But I don't think I did as much separation in my actual personal statement than I did in my research proposal. The research proposal was much more academic writing, and I will do this, I will do that, and it looked like everything was clear what you're gonna do in that. But for my research proposal, it was purely narrative. I started off with a story about why I fell in love with physics is the first paragraph, I think, of my personal statement. And went into all my experiences, and it led to my research interests, and it became a really large thing. But my project is very heavily almost exactly I'm studying me almost. That is what my project is. I'm very interested in people like me. And so it was very easy for me to make all these connections. It wasn't that hard. So I think if you think about what got you into what you're doing and why you're excited about it, and just the idea of wanting to spread that can be enough for a broader impact. And then finding, even if you're connecting these programs that are available or that you've done or that you plan to do to that and making that clearly your motivation could be really strong. And that was what was strong for me.
What resources are here? So we have, the personal statement really refers to what you have done and who you are. Okay, so in a way, it's kind of retrospective, whereas the research proposal is forward-looking, what you are going to do. If you can link them, of course, that's the strongest. You're extending what you have done and who you are into the research that you propose. And so that's the piece where in broader impacts, what motivated you to connect with people outside a narrow area that you might be working in, and how is that going to be reflected when you're a graduate student doing research? So what are the resources you can use to substantiate that? Is that part of what you're asking? What? No, the resources in the institution that you can use, well, to give you ideas to do things like, in other words, when I'm talking about institutional resources, for the research component, are you at a university who has facilities for what you need to do, or advisors in the area you're going to work in? And then the broader impacts component is, there are programs at this university, the Bold Center in the College of Engineering. There's an Institute for Community Engagement and Outreach. There are programs that you can get involved with, so you don't have to try on your own to develop a program that gives you an opportunity to do that. And I would say one of the things that resonates a lot in reviews, even of faculty when they write proposals, is you will probably be doing experiments or collecting data or doing field work that could be turned into a module or an experiment for an undergraduate laboratory. That's a really solid example that's easy to develop and think about if your research ideas are developed. What component of that could you translate immediately into a class or a lab? And how would that further the education of the students who were there? So that's another component where you're relying on what's the curriculum in your program.
So you've just started, you've been with your advisor for a couple of months. You were admitted to the program for a reason. The advisor must know you, even if you've rotated through their laboratory. In your application materials, there's some background. And yeah, that should be fine.
But meet with them, make sure they're aware of your proposal. I mean, I wrote a letter for one of my students who got the GRF, and I said, she showed up in my office in August, brand new graduate student. She had some ideas, but and then over the next 2 months, we continued to meet, refine her ideas, and talk about it. And basically, that kind of narrative was a piece of my letter. So I wasn't trying to make stuff up. I know this person, and she's going to do all of these things. But then I said, you know, I've had 26 PhD students, and I have a reasonable expectation that she's got great potential. So sure.
You know, so I was chair of the Graduate Admissions Committee for Geological Sciences. We're one of the top programs in the world. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants. Also, CU happens to have a pretty decent record of putting people in the astronaut corps. But a lot like medical school, in an application to geological sciences, you don't begin. I've dreamt ever since I was a little kid that I would be, you know, astronaut and land on the moon or be a doctor or whatever. No, because that is like the ultimate cliche. So I agree. Just avoid those and put it into your own words and explain honestly why it is that this really excites you and why they should be excited too.
And to speak to your specific example, talk about the work that you want to do in, all right, I'm doing this work with embryonic fish. How is that going to move the field forward? What's the next thing? Okay, I'm working on this piece. What's the next thing that comes out of that?
Face it head on. Say you got an honorable mention, but you're not somebody who gives up. And you know that you said, okay, this is great. It's, you know, it's a handshake, comes with no money. Don't write that. Yeah. Okay, but keeping that in mind, it's you came very close. So why didn't you? Right? You got one very good, and the rest was excellent. Okay, write back and make it happen.
One of the things you should know about the review panels that I've served on is the first day of a 3-day process, 2/3 of the proposals are eliminated. So if you got an honorable mention, you were in the top third. And at that point, it's almost chance. That's what Steve was saying, 2 excellence and a very good, as opposed to 3 excellence. So yes, by all means address anything in the comments that looked like it moved you from an award to an honorable mention, but be encouraged. It means that you had a very, very solid proposal. Sure, put that in your personal statement, as a matter of fact. It's part of your research, education, and experience. In fact, to be able to respond to that as far as I mean, one of the things that I always notice with graduate students is you submit a manuscript for review and it comes back with comments. Some of them aren't very nice. What do? Are you crushed? Do you withdraw the paper? Or do you quit graduate school? Or do you absorb those things? That's just part of the scientific process, if you will, and move on. And make that into a theme. You're prepared for the life of a researcher, which is always being reviewed, sometimes critically.
And deal with what you can control. Absolutely.
Based on the number of months of enrollment.
Yes. Give me a second here. So you cannot have completed more than 12 months of full-time graduate study or the equivalent unless you are, you started, you went away to do something else, family leave or military service, you've been away for 2 years or more and you're coming back. So basically, if you've been in full-time graduate study for 1 year, you're no longer eligible.
So my last student who got a fellowship, one of her letter writers was a high school teacher, which she had been visiting in the school and sharing her knowledge of physics and chemistry of the earth and so on in an earth science module. So no, it's about what you think are the best people who can help you get this proposal through. And I would think that the person who you're working most closely with or have taken classes most with, and it's really inspired you, would be one of those people. Not necessarily the person who you may be working for at another institution or even at the same institution, should you choose to stay. As a reviewer, I'm really looking at the quality of the message, not so much if the person is from a particular institution. But you do have to show that you should be able to realize whatever it is, this idea is that you come up with the resources available to you, even if you have to invent them yourself.
But that's why you have 3. I mean, you can run that spectrum. I think, remember, you can suggest 5 reviewers. This is another thing. If somebody in your list is flaky, even if you submit 2, the NSF will review your proposal with 2 letters. Okay, so they do allow a little bit of flexibility with that, although you should not rely on somebody being flaky. But the other thing is, if you submit 5 names, the NSF will only take the letters in order of the top 3.
But you can rank them.
And you almost, yeah.
You actually have the opportunity to rank the letters when you submit them. So if you have 5, they're only going to look at 3. So if to use your example, if you're trying to get a letter from somebody who has access to a resource that you think you might need, that might be like your 4th or your 5th letter, because you're less likely to be reliant on them. But you would want to have 3 really solid ones who can talk about the likelihood that you're going to succeed at what you've planned to do, the impact that that's likely to have on the field, and the broader impacts. You got to be able to sell yourself before you worry so much about the resources.
5 minutes left. Let's see if we get 2 more questions.
It is certainly correct. If you are eligible, you will not be eligible. If you apply, you will not be eligible next year. For questions like that, I think one of the things that I should say broadly is NSF program officers are really great at responding to emails and phone calls. So don't hesitate to contact the program officer in your area. But it seems to me if there's a gap of 2 years, I think is the, that should be, then you should be eligible for a 5-year gap. I think in your personal statement, it would be very important to address what happened in that 5-year gap and why that has in some way motivated you to go back to school, either to get a second master's degree or a PhD.
They specifically say you should address the gap.
Yeah, although, I wanted that maybe the scope of the research that's within your proposal. In terms of how they're evaluated, there's no difference. I think there's some expectation that people who get the fellowship and intend to get a master's degree may go on and get a PhD if they get excited about research. So at least on the panels that I've been on, we've been instructed to not differentiate in terms of quality. In other words, we don't expect a lower quality of proposal for a master's degree, but you probably should be aware, if you intend to get a research master's, of having a reasonable scope to your research, what you can accomplish in basically 2 years instead of 4 or 5. guys address that, who did resubmit?
Yeah, yes. If you've submitted in the past, you definitely want to look at your comments. I don't know, it's a toss-up. I think I had like a few really good ones and some that were like not helpful at all. But I went back to my materials and looked at kind of what, like, and tried to see what they were seeing through the comments in my actual materials. And I think I worked way harder on my proposal than my personal statement, to be honest. And that's because, like I said, I was in science communication and I had to make it more sciencey, and that was like a big part of mine. And scope, they said my scope seemed unrealistic. Yeah, I went back to my proposal, and now that I had a better idea of like my theoretical background and then like the actual data collection numbers was something I talked a lot with my advisor about. Like, how much of the data do I really say that I'm gonna collect? And it's like being that specific I was in my proposal. Yeah, and I used the actual one and just tweaked what I had to make it clearer, and went through that iteration a bunch of times with my advisor till it kind of seemed reasonable. So yeah, definitely use your old. My personal statement, like I said, was going to submit the exact same one almost. And then was like, wait a minute, like I went through a whole nother year of experiences and then added that to it, and yeah.
Yeah, so it'll evolve naturally.
Yeah.
And new
Definitely
things
don't start
happen.
over.
That awesome idea maybe has changed a little bit. And maybe part of your question had something to do with institutional memory. They're going to have a past copy of the, no. That doubles the work. I mean, it just is not going to happen. Does squishy mean watered down or something, or?
Like overly narrative? I'm thinking, you know, remember this is an award to you. So the bottom line is they're trying to figure out your potential for research. And a way to look at that is what have you done, and how does that relate to your moving forward? So that's the piece of what I would call narrative. So it doesn't have to be your emotional growth, but it has what experiences that you've had motivated you forward to do advanced study and do research. So you're drawing on particular experiences from your past. And some advice. I mean, I've had the last student I had who was awarded that worked as an intern in a Pacific island doing ecology studies and was moving to engineering, but she was focusing on some of the unique problems of isolated societies and how that translated to engineering, which was a change of field for her. Another one of my students was a return Peace Corps volunteer, and she did water and sanitation and talked about how the inadequacies that she experienced as a Peace Corps volunteer motivated her to go on and get a PhD and improve her own knowledge of sanitation as it might apply to development. But you could have been involved in a research project as an undergraduate and gotten excited about doing work. Some experience in your life that you can use to move forward. That's not mushy. You know, do you see what I'm saying? Yes, that would be part of your personal statement.
Yeah, I was going to respond to that. In a way to make it like flow, I guess, you can use your personal statement to kind of set up mentally for the reviewer, like where it came from and where that idea came from. But yeah, you don't want to use your research proposal to talk about really yourself or
Shorten